Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our online discussion on a very, very relevant topic, employee wellness programs. And due to COVID, this has obviously, garnered the limelight. And I'm very excited to have a fantastic panel who have a breadth of experience and expertise in employee wellness. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion. And as always, please do remember that this is kind of a free-range discussion. I would love your comments, insights, rants, raves through the chat, and our panelists will be responding to your questions or queries when they have a chance. So let's start, with the webinar. I can see some familiar faces in the audience, including I can actually see Dale on the camera. So, hey Dale, how are you going? So can I just request all the participants to just turn off their cameras so that we can kind of focus on the panelists, including Richard. So welcome, Richard. Excellent. Okay, so let's start with the webinar today. This session is being recorded for replay later for the people who have missed it, and we look forward to your participation. Really delighted to introduce our panel today. We have Rebecca Squire from Allianz, looking after wellness and employee engagement in Allianz. Hi, Rebecca. We also have Henry Albrecht, all the way from Washington, USA, not Washington, D.C., but Washington State, Seattle, in the U.S. So Henry is the founder CEO of Limeade. I think it's a name that name of the company that you'll get to know a little bit more in the slides, but they're doing a lot in this space, especially in terms of providing enterprise solutions. So Henry, welcome and thank you very much, especially participating at this time of the night for you.
Great to be here, thank you.
Finally, also really happy to have Michael Sainsbury on the panel, and really excited to actually hear from Michael, because Michael's working for Australian Unity, and they do have some workforce at the front lines dealing with customers and the risk associated with COVID. So really interested to hear about what Michael and Australian Unity are doing in that space. So thank you very much for joining, Michael, and welcome to the panel.
Hi everybody, great to be here, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Michael. So just in terms of the structure, what we have really is basically three parts to the online discussion. We set the scene through sharing some research and some statistics. Then we move on to the individual presentations by the panelists, and each panelist have selected their own area or point of view or things that they want to discuss with employee wellness programs. And finally, we do have Q&A and next steps for at the end of the webinar. But please feel free to just use the chat as much as you want. Shreya is there online, will be monitoring the chat and providing information. So feel free to discuss, ask questions through the chat window. Okay, so we want to really keep this this initial segment short, because I know that you want to get to hear from the panelist. So just a quick word about EX Assembly. So it's a community of people really interested and passionate about employee experience, and we've got a range of offerings that hopefully you'll take up, including we've got meetups in Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane. We've got webinars like this one happening all around. We're also planning an unconference, which unfortunately we have to put off due to COVID for the time being. But we've got some information about our collabs, which are collaborative projects in around candidate experience, people data silo busting, and learner experience. So there are more details on the website, and we'll be coming out with other services very soon. Excellent. So just in terms of what is coming up, obviously we are talking about employee wellness now. We talked about the unpacking employee experience, and next one is going to be really interesting. It's about using workforce analytics as the foundation of EX. So how do you lead designing EX by using analytics? So it is obviously analytics is something that's being talked about a lot, but we will be talking about the nuts and bolts of how to use analytics for designing better employee experience. I'm also very, also we've got meetups in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane. Please go to the website and join the meetups. We're having virtual meetups, but as soon as COVID allows us to do so, we will be meeting face to face in your typical meetup style. So please do join us and sign up for the list. I'm also very excited to announce that we're sponsoring a business simulation tournament run by Richard Kelly and the team-based strategic thinking. We've just agreed only yesterday to sponsor this program. If you know me, know EX Assembly, and also know Learning Cafe that we used to run earlier. Very simulations, business simulations, very close to our heart, and which is why we are inviting organizations and teams to join this simulation tournament. And the good thing is that the tournament is free. So because we're sponsoring it, it's free. It is a combination of online. It's going to be completely virtual. It's a combination of online inputs from Richard and his team, and then there will be a tournament, and the winners will be announced at the end of it. So there's more information on the website, and please do sign up either individually or in teams. I know that Richard's online, so looking forward to this. Okay, so quick definition about employee experience, because it is something that's quite new. Our own take on employee experience is the definition on the screen as you see it, and this is the definition that we borrowed from McKinsey. And there are lots, but this is the one that we like the most, where it says that it's actually a mindset and method. It's a combination of mindset and method, where companies and people, so employees or the workforce, working together to create personalized, authentic experiences that ignite the passion to tap into purpose, to strengthen individual, team, and company performance. So it's quite a comprehensive definition and can mean a lot of things. But the figure actually shows, the image shows our own framework for EX. So while we've got the triangle at the top, which is about improving organizational performance, we think it's equally important to consider the employee's own personal journey in designing employee experience in organizations. So it's quite important to realize that each person has a unique journey in terms of their life stage, their own values, alignment to company values. So it needs to be considered quite well in terms of designing employee experience. It's something that we sometimes forget while doing that. There's more information on our website. And just want to add a caveat saying that we do recognize that we'd rather call it workforce experience than employee experience. And that is something that we will, I guess, come to and change when the time is right. So at the moment, employee experience is a term that's more recognizable in the market. So a little bit about yourselves. The attendees in this particular webinar, we had about 16.8% who identified themselves as CX or EX professionals. We had a small amount of business or team managers, but a majority were about 66.6% were HR, OD, L&D professionals. So really happy to see this audience, but we are starting to see a growing number of people identifying themselves as EX or CX professionals joining the webinar. Then we've got others, about 10%, which includes consultants and entrepreneurs. In terms of locations, most from Sydney, some from Melbourne, Brisbane, Singapore, Perth, and from others include US. So that's the audience makeup. We asked a few questions around when you were registering, and these are your responses. And one of the questions that we asked, and I might actually ask the audience to, the audience and the panel to share their thoughts on this. The question we asked was, how has employee wellness been impacted by COVID? And a substantial percent, close to 45% said that there was a substantial increase in employee wellness initiatives, increased by 20 to 50%. 5 to 10% increase, small increase, no impact, smaller, and a big increase was very, very little. So you can see from the graph that people have identified that there was a substantial increase in the amount of employee wellness initiatives in the organization is quite substantial. I just want to check with the panel, Michael, Rebecca, and Henry, from yourselves. Have you also, in your own experience, seen this happening in the past couple of weeks? There's an increased, focused on employee wellness. I probably want to start with Michael first, and followed by Rebecca, and then Henry.
Yeah, I think, Jeevan, certainly my organisation, the focus has been very specifically around COVID. And I'll talk today around our workforce who are at risk. So there's been a lot of energy that's gone into that. It's been very challenging, of course, because you've got this sort of emergent information and the need to be very agile around putting things in place. And certainly as the time goes on, and I have to say in the last few weeks, as you highlight, there really is a lot of psychosocial impact, particularly around our workforce from home. I think that, like most businesses, we, put people at home fairly quickly. We probably didn't address the, practical physical ergonomics of their workstations. And now, of course, we've got that sort of isolation, loss of connection. So yes, we are being asked to now come up with some fairly quick initiatives in this first quarter to remediate some of that.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, and I would say, from an Allianz perspective, I would probably echo that. So we have, we've definitely got a really solid offering of proactive strategies across our mental health and wellbeing kind of offering, but we've also really stepped into that reactive space as well, and we've definitely dialed things up, and especially now again looking at what are the additional things we can do to support our colleagues in Victoria as well. So I would say a substantial increase from my perspective.
Thank you, Rebecca.
I guess that leaves me. This is Henry. By the way, thank you for putting up with my American accent. In exchange, I will share all of the 14 years of observations I have on this market. So thank you for that. And I would say what we're seeing, at least in the US market, but also globally, as we're a global company, is what I would say companies putting one foot on the gas and one foot on the brake at the same time, because concurrent with COVID is a massive economic slowdown. So I think there's more will, there's more intent, and there's more action amongst the people remaining at companies than ever. But there's also a little bit of a, let's do more without changing our spending and our budget. So I would say it's a little bit mixed, but I often use the analogy of a low tide. At a very, very low tide around, at least where I am here in the Northwest, you see all the nasty rocks and barnacles and squishy stuff at the bottom. And I think that's what companies are seeing now, the emotional toll, the stress, the working parents who don't have other places to go. The fact that COVID is actually disproportionately affecting people in economic or physical hardship. All of that is being seen and being recognized. And we believe that that's actually, as bad as COVID is, potentially good for employee well-being in the future. So
Thanks. Thank you very much, Henry. Actually, that actually is a nice segue to the next slide, because the question we asked was, how effective do you think the employee wellness programs are performing? And 41% said it was kind of average. The other choices was that it was not effective, 26%. Another 26% said they were effective, and only 7% said that they were very effective, right? So I think that probably ties into the comment that kind of Henry is making, is that increased focus and increased demand on the wellness programs. At the same time, you've kind of got the same budget and probably the same foundational thinking about employee programs, which has been asked to accelerate. Press the accelerator very quickly. So, Henry, are you first? Are you surprised by the kind of results we've got on the survey?
No, not at all. Actually, that seems about average globally. And I think you actually answered your own question earlier when you said silo busting, when you were talking about employee experience. I think a lot of companies have 20 HR programs, from onboarding, safety, compliance, learning, recognition, wellness or well-being, training, and 10 more. And if you just think of each of them in their own silo, I think what you get is average results. And so I think the effectiveness of the program has very little to do with the intent of the people doing it, or maybe even the technology. It has everything to do with how companies are organized around it and whether they view that it will move the needle on business results. And I think the best companies in the world see that for sure, but I don't think every company sees that.
Thank you very much. And Michael and Rebecca, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think it varies. I think that I've seen a lot of businesses locked into a fairly conventional approach to wellness. Often it's event based, and it's not necessarily. And I think Henry probably identifies that it's not an integrated approach. That if you want to more broadly look at wellness or well-being, then there has to be this multi-dimensional approach. And I think quite often we sometimes have a bias towards, I think, physical health, and often that's event-based, or it could be on-demand resources around health. I think Rebecca perhaps might talk a little bit more about mental health, which is a really emerging area, particularly in Australia, and I think we're getting better at managing mental health and supporting people through that.
Yeah, and I would echo your sentiment around it being multifaceted, because with well-being holistically, there is no one size fits all. And where you sit on the continuum of health or well-being, really determines whether you actively participate in these opportunities and campaigns or whether you are less likely to. And so I think, even with things like we've done around our Dare to Care campaign, which is a well-being challenge, we had great participation, and for 98% of people that joined said it had a positive impact, but we're only tapping into about 10% of our population. So, there's limitations, and that's why I do think any approach to mental health and well-being at work really does you have to pull on many levers in order to make it effective, because it's just not one size fits all.
Thank you very much. I'm just sharing the next statistic with you, which is we kind of asked what was the highest priority for employee wellness programs, and there were three choices: higher morale, greater productivity, and the third was saving costs, healthcare costs and other costs. Nobody actually chose costs, and 71.4% chose higher morale, which I think is to be expected in the current environment, while there is 28.6% who said greater productivity. But probably want to just get Henry's view on this, is because he's kind of been in that world for quite some time in terms of employee wellness budgets, etc. Is that and this is probably more an Australian flavor than global. So Henry, what's your thoughts on this statistic?
I consider this chart a great sign of enlightenment in your part of the world. Actually, I think the science would tell us that whenever you say, hey, sir, ma'am, you're overweight, you need to fix yourself because you might cost us more money in absenteeism or other areas, there's no science that says that's effective, and there's no science that says people like that. So I consider this chart very enlightened. What I would say is that morale concept is actually, if you break it down, it probably includes things like employee engagement, employee turnover, teamwork, esprit de corps, ability to deliver things on time, which I guess bleeds over into productivity. But morale is actually a broad term that we would probably try to break into component parts, like likelihood to recommend that employer, et cetera.
Thank you, Henry. And probably you want to check with Michael and Rebecca. I guess in not necessarily your organization, but what's your feeling about, maybe the bean counters after the worst of COVID is over, putting the magnifying lens on the cost what's your thoughts on that? Because I'm at some point in time, there is, a budget and money allocated. And do you see more demand for an ROI on the money that's been spent?
Yeah, look, I think there is an intention to, increase, we'll call it engagement, contribute to a positive culture. Certainly in the space that I sit in, unfortunately, there is an imperative around costs related to work-related injury. So we are now a self-insured business for the purposes of workers' compensation, and there's no doubt that much of our well-being program, it is targeted to try and, one around injury prevention, which is largely what I do in my role, but two, when an injury does occur, then to get people, to recover as best as possible at the workplace. So I think that there definitely is going to be, for us, there's a return on investment. Maybe it's immeasurable in terms of the impacts on productivity, engagement, culture, but certainly it's very measurable in terms of workers' compensation premium.
Thank you, Michael. Rebecca?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would echo that. I mean, when we look at the business case for a proactive approach to wellbeing, sort of at Allianz, the things we consider are, we look at our workers' comp claims, we look at the risk profile of individuals, we look at absenteeism, presenteeism, engagement, our work well score and our engagement survey as well. And these are all both leading and lagging indicators of how people are feeling. And really the aim is to reduce that risk profile. And I think sometimes something like, well-being is quite intangible to measure or to pinpoint. And even though workers' comp claim might not be related specifically to personal well-being, it could be to do with bullying or harassment, it will usually stem from that place of somebody not being at their full potential or really well, which is typically where we'll start to see a deterioration on how someone's showing up, how someone's performing, and so on. And so the more that we can get people into that healthy space of coping, the more we will see greater performance and productivity. And so, yeah, there's lots of metrics you can draw on, but you can never quite pinpoint exactly the point in time or the extenuating circumstances, what the person's situation is outside of work, and you can't really control for that. But what you can create is the good, safe, psychologically safe, trusting, supportive conditions at work that help facilitate someone being their best to the best of your ability within your control at work.
Look, absolutely, and thank you very much for that to the panel for your thoughts on that one. But essentially, what we have just a little bit of research, and you can see, especially on the right hand side, there is a survey and the references there. But we kind of talked about what does wellness mean and what's really what is really desired by the employees, and quite surprisingly, there was a lot around physical comfort. I'm not sure if this was before or after COVID, and things might change, but this probably, if you assume this is before COVID, it was quite a lot around the physical aspects of the of wellness in terms of quality, light, temperature, acoustics, and then you had fitness, healthful food options, etc. So it's quite. I think this is just to illustrate that, as I think Rebecca, you said, that there's so many dimensions, and Michael also kind of mentioned there's so many dimensions to wellness. In fact, it's a term that could mean anything to different types of people. So it'll be an interesting discussion just going forward, and I'll definitely ask in the Q&A section about your own definition of what wellness is. Is the term too wide, and can it be contained? So just some research there. Just very quickly, our take on employee wellness. Number one is that employee wellness has been, enterprise employee wellness has been asked to step up to really adapt and deliver for issues arising out of COVID, both in terms of scope and scale. So I think we were quite unprepared for the expansion in our role and responsibility. And that's natural. And because of that, I guess we see the statistics saying that it's not very effective, because we weren't really ready for what we were being asked for. But I think there's a way forward, because we have been put in the situation, and the challenge really is to leverage technology. That's the only way you can kind of scale and personalize within a constrained budget. But at the same time, we all know that over-reliance on technology for employee wellness is definitely backfire. So it needs to be a very judicious mix, and that's where the art and craft comes in terms of how you design employee wellness programs. And we probably see that employee wellness will also take a more strategic approach within enterprises. So now that we've kind of been through this, it's really a part of contingency planning and business continuity, employee wellness. So it's become a more critical part of organizations, and it will, I think, be taken into consideration in risk assessment and risk plans. But as EC Assembly, we always want to emphasize that, hey, when you're designing employee wellness programs, ask the workers what's most important to them, what's really critical for them. And I suspect that answer will change, especially in situations like COVID, almost every week, right? So we're kind of going into a different phase of the COVID, and the needs were different. So always, to ask employees and then design around that. So that's me talking. I'm going to hand it over to Rebecca. Over to you, Rebecca. Just a little bit of yourself, and then we'll go to your
Thank
slides.
you. Yeah, sure thing. I'll keep it high level as well, because I know we're tight on time, and I know there's some great content in the rest of this presentation. But I'm Beck. I work for Allianz. I look after engagement and employee experience. I'm hugely passionate about the mental health and wellbeing space, and I wholeheartedly believe that the more that you can make people help people to feel safe and supported, and to be themselves and to do their best, is ultimately the key to having well individuals at work and to achieving the best business outcomes. So as a background in organizational psychology, sorry, my battery's just dying at the right appropriate time. I'm just plugging back in. With a background in org psych, I absolutely love to help people achieve their potential, and helping people be well is just one component of that. So I thought what I would do today is just give you a bit of a look at, a look under the hood, if you like, at the Allianz Thriving Workplace, Flourishing People strategy, and really zoom into the guiding principles behind what we do at Allianz, and how we try to help people secure their future, which is, our tagline. So before I came into this role, there was a huge amount of work done by the previous team, and of course the people that lead our workers' compensation business and our industry white papers around awareness into action. And so I really took the framework that was in place and sort of created a current state analysis of where the business was at, and try to understand what levers we need to pull. And I think for me, we've touched on it, but a multifaceted approach is really important. And the three guiding principles which underpin our strategy from a mental health and wellbeing perspective are absolutely key, I think, to getting the balance right in any approach. And these are really around preventing harm, promoting the positive, and managing illness. And I think in the current context that we're in, and I'll talk a little bit about the things that we've done to pivot for COVID and continue to do so, but we've seen so much around the promoting the positive of late. And I think with a lot of energy in the positive psychology space, which I personally back, there's been so many great initiatives, challenges, approaches in this way. But first and foremost, we actually need to set work up and design work to prevent harm. And whether you're in a blue collar or a white collar environment, as in whether you need to turn up at work and operate safely. For example, I used to work for Sydney Water. So if you're in a water treatment plant, how do you make sure you're performing your role safely? If you're in the office, how is your ergonomic setup correct? But also, when we look at factors like stress in your role or exposure to trauma through roles such as in the claims and workers' comp business, people are, having quite difficult conversations throughout the day. So I think some things we all need to consider at this moment in time is where is our focus and where is the balance? Because yes, we absolutely want to promote the positive, but sometimes we have to start with the harm prevention piece too. And I think where my head is at the moment is we have done all of these great positive pieces of work, but how do we now sort of shift the focus, especially for our colleagues in Melbourne, and say, we can't expect people to turn up and be as productive as they were, because one, they're in a second lockdown, which is influencing individuals on a day-to-day basis, and it's a struggle. Two, people have different situations. So they may be working from home alone, they might have children, they may be caring for elderly people, or who knows what the circumstances are. But first and foremost, how do we release the pressure valve and take the stress away? Or manage the expectation that the way that you used to perform in your role is probably not possible. And how do we lead with that tone from the top and create some assurance and security for people who are already concerned about losing their jobs? And so for me, I'm working with our team to shift the tone in the conversation in that regard, whilst we of course continue down promoting the positive route with the great strategies we've got in place. And then, of course, managing illness. So on the other end of the healthy coping spectrum, if somebody is having, mental health concerns, is physically unwell, what do we actually do to support that individual? And so, of course, if there are guiding principles, the drivers underneath that we need to pull, really create those conditions wherever you sit on that continuum. So,
Look,
of course, as part of a Thrive.
Can I jump in to ask you, when you're kind of, you're right, the nature of COVID has changed. So you've got a second wave coming through, and that just prolongs things. And you're trying to cater for that. Do you feel though that you've got lots of options or lots of solutions for that, or do you have many buttons to press or not?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as part of a short, medium and long-term strategy, we have many different things in place. Whilst we don't have a collaborative tool, for example, at Allianz, we've found ways that we can help people be connected and to have a conversation with one another and to share. And so I think it's the balance of trying to be agile and going, yes, we've got these long-term things in play, but what do we actually need now? What do we need today? And so, for example, things like hosting mindfulness and yoga sessions, which plays in the proactive space, but giving people a moment to pause and to breathe and to just be where they are today, I think is really important. And I think it's an interesting thing to consider as we look into the future. How far can we actually look, given that the world is changing on a minute-by-minute basis, So it's almost, I think in every form of leadership at the moment, that agility piece is important. And I think it's about moving from that space where we expect things to be a certain way into a mindset of just trust and stepping into that more so rather than expecting order and a strategic plan to play out like it might have done previously. So that's personally where my head's at anyway. I'd love to know what other people think too.
Thanks, Rebecca.
So if we just flick to the next slide, I thought what I would share is just some of the things that we have done to pivot our longer term strategy for COVID. So the first piece was the red zone care information. So I'm using Graham Cowan's language here from Are You OK? Around this, because red zone care for me is, if somebody needs help, they're not okay, what do they do? Who do they talk to? How do they reach out? And so we went really hard around creating a COVID hub where you could go to for information around wellbeing, around our EAP program, around our mental health first aid officer network, and really started driving some storytelling around it's okay not to be okay. Here's how you can reach out. Here's the support that's offered. Here's how we can help you, and really a very strong tone from the top around please prioritize your well-being. The second thing that we did was really focus on proactive support and resilience. So this would play in that space of promoting the positive, and we did a lot here. A lot of initiatives around supporting leaders through an Adapt and Thrive webinar series around how do you have a critical conversation? How do you support people to set up to be productive? Because that was a concern for our people. How do you encourage them to take a break? How do you create the delineation between work and home life when we're in the same four walls? Those are the types of conversations we were having. We extended our support network of mental health first aid officers and started to lean in to support them further as well as kind of a first line of defense. We stood up challenges around connection and trust and community as well. So we ran this Dare to Care challenge, which is helped people to participate in activities aligned to wellbeing that they were rewarded for, but also post and share to inspire one another. And it was really lovely to see how many people actually engaged with that. And it gave people an opportunity sort of about 6 weeks in to go, hang on a minute, I've either got really stuck into my exercise and got a solid routine, or maybe I haven't, and that I need to make an adjustment. So here's an incentive to get on board, and here's what all of my colleagues are doing, and we are in this shared experience and we're in it together. That was really well received. And in the meantime, what we've also been doing is exploring enabling technology. So a communications platform, and some technology that will help us host a number of these initiatives on a more longer term basis as well.
Thank you, Rebecca.
So mindful of time, I'll pause.
Look, there are actually a question for you on the chat. So, when you get a chance, you can respond to that. So that's cool. Thank you very much for that, Rebecca. And it's really great to know what Allianz are doing. And we look forward and wish you all the success in going forward. I'm going to move on to the next panelist. I'm really excited to hear from Henry. So Henry, maybe a little bit about yourself, and then over to you.
All right, well, you have to flick to the next slide. Nobody wants to read my whole resume, but I will say I started Limeade kind of at the intersection of what I would call employee engagement and well-being, in that I burned out at my job. I loved my job. I was into my job. I was committed to my job. I was working 70 hours a week at my job. And I had a values disconnect with the organization in a way that I burned out. So to me, I'm excited to be here today because it's an EX forum and we're talking about well-being. I think that's yin and yang. I don't think you can have a great world-class employee experience without well-being, and vice versa. You can't have a well-being that works unless it's fully integrated into how you think about your employee experience. So grateful to be here. A little bit about Limeade. We are a ASX traded company as of December of last year, and we serve large employers with employee experience technology programs, including well-being, diversity and inclusion, employee engagement, communications, a little learning, a little recognition. And we believe all of that, especially for distributed workforces, needs to go through one mobile experience, because EX is more than 20 disconnected programs. You can go to the next one. I'll try to go quickly too, because Rebecca, first of all, I loved your circle and my circle are very similar here, because we both had the people in the middle. It's really designing around a human. HR technology has not typically done that. They typically design around the transaction, the task required, et cetera, and that gives a kind of a Pavlovian effect. If we pay you this, you do that. That's the work equation. And this whole concept of EX and well-being requires a slightly different worldview that I'll try to explain. And I will say honestly, the knowledge behind this, without bragging, is based on 14 years of failing trying other things. Failing trying Pavlovian programs, punitive programs, transactional programs. We have rigorous science I'll share some tidbits from about why this approach is actually more likely to succeed, not just for well-being, but for your whole EX. So the first one is the whole person. If you try to imagine someone who loves every aspect of their life but hates their job, it's kind of hard to do. So we think about physical, emotional, financial, work, social, even spiritual well-being. Those are all factors that help you bring your whole self to work. The whole company, the blue circle, is the world around you. In healthcare, you would call that a social determinant of health, a cultural factor. In org psych, which Beck would know, it's concepts like manager support. How do your leaders show up? What resources, tools, physical environment? There are levers that companies can pull to have people perceive care. And then lastly, the ecosystem, as was mentioned also, EAP programs, behavioral health, safety, disability, return to work programs. All of those things need to be connected with the person at the center. And there's a why behind this too, if you flick to the next slide, which is, okay, that's a cool concept, putting people first. That makes sense. It seems a little soft, maybe at times, but can you flick to the next slide, Jeeves? Maybe you did. Okay, so there's a why to care. If we're gonna put the person at the center and show them about care, why would you wanna do that? It's because of this is the digging into the morale part, right? Morale, twice as likely to be engaged at work. Aon Hewitt says that when people are engaged at work, for every dollar of revenue, anyway, I'm gonna get this stat wrong. Anyway, it has very hard bottom line and top line impacts. 4 times less likely to suffer from burnout and leave your job, 7 times more likely to feel included, 9 times more likely to stay 3 or more years, and 10 times more likely to recommend the company as a great place to work. And this is all based on a perception. If people just feel cared for, it matters. So you can have the best technology in the world, or you can have managers who go to their teams and say, hey, I care about you. How are you? How can I clear obstacles for you to do your job? Are you having troubles at home that I can support you with, or the company can provide you resources for? The cool thing about care is you can step into it at any time with anyone in your organization. Next slide. I want to give Michael time, so let me go kind of quickly. So these next few slides just talk about what is care connected to. So what you'll see is, on the left is how do people feel about well-being, engagement, and inclusion when they don't perceive general care from their company. And so obviously the summary here is care is something that drives all of those outcomes. And if you go to the next slide, it ties a little bit more specifically into well-being concepts like stress and burnout. So if you don't feel your organization cares, only 14% of you feel like the stress is manageable. Whereas if you feel care, 50% feel it's manageable. And this is pre-COVID, before stress is multiplied with economic uncertainty, kids at home, healthcare issues, hospitalizations, all of that. So I think that's an important concept. Another EX point to this is many people view stress as a well-being thing and employee engagement as more of a talent, organizational development, psychology thing. But burnout actually requires both concepts. There's some really interesting research from Professor Christine Maslock at Stanford that talks about how burnout happens. Burnout only happens when you really are passionate and engaged in your work so long, and you don't take care of yourself, that's when your well-being suffers and you burn out and quit. That pretty much makes the case for burnout being a tax on your best people. And they don't just get sick and have workers' comp, which is a big deal, and we don't want that to happen. They quit. And the ROI of turnover, therefore, is so much greater than the ROI even of health issues. So I would that's why EX matters to this. And then lastly, I think there's one more chart. Likelihood to recommend. So exact same point is care and likelihood to recommend. And then I think I have one or two more, but go ahead to the next
No,
one.
take your time, Henry. Take your time. We've got time.
This one speaks for itself. I mean, do you want people saying good things about your organization at Allianz? Do you want to recruit those awesome, financial advisors and people who are working with clients? I would hate to work at a company where 7% of people or 9% of people are likely to recommend that as a great place to work. I mean, it's hard enough to recruit people. We're in the same building with Amazon. Microsoft's about 4 miles down the road. We're in a competitive job environment, but we actually aren't challenged with recruiting because of this reason, because of the perception of care.
Thank you, Michael.
I think I have one.
Yep.
Yeah, and so I think there's a question coming up about return on investment too, and I think well-being and wellness can be viewed as one of those nice-to-have things that if you're tough enough, you don't really need it. And in corporate Australia, I'm sure, in India, and in the States, and Europe, the executive suite, the C-suite, is filled with tough people. And those tough people think that everyone acts and behaves like them, even though they suffer the same issues that anyone else does. My dad was a pretty tough business executive who had a heart attack at 52. He survived, and that's great, but it took him off his career path. But maybe he would have thought wellness was kind of a joke until that happened. And so what we've found is that having a language for talking about a hard return on investment for these types of programs is mandatory. And so I talked about company care and what a company can do and an employee can do, but the people results and business results are the most important part if you want to actually sell this and have more than 10 or 20% of people who are already marathoners participate. You need to show the connection to turnover, the connection to safety results, the connection to sales, or if you're in the healthcare industry, patient mortality even. Those are all direct connections that can be made with data, and I'm sure you get to that on the next session you have with executive analytics and insights and all that. So having an ROI model is the way for people who have a lot of goodwill to actually put it into effect. Lastly, I love how you started the meeting with silo busting. there are so many different things that can influence care. We've listed some of them here, and Limeade does many, if not most of these, and there's some ways to do it. But if you're only thinking about it as a wellness program, I would say it's less likely to succeed than saying employee well-being is one of the core ways that we have an energized workforce that serves our customers better. And, you know, whether you're in public sector and you're working in water safety, or you're in a retail store, employee well-being is what helps our people connect better with our customers and sell more. When you get that mindset, it's actually, you don't have to think about all the silos. You just want to get it in front of them and have the CEO and have the manager and leader through technology. If you're a scaled distributed organization, if you're not, if you're lucky enough all to be in the same building, it's probably easier without technology, but using technology to reinforce across all of these silos consistent messages of care. So that's what we've learned. And actually, one question I get sometimes is, what's more important, an individual's ability to manage their own well-being and be resilient and be tough and have mindfulness and exercise and eat well and not be addicted and all that, or the organization's impact on them, the culture around them? And our research is very clear that the organizational impact around a person is a bigger driver, a more important driver of someone's well-being than their own capabilities, because the company can set the cultural norms. So I'd love to hear questions, and Michael, over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll actually got a interesting question for you, Henry, but also the rest of the panel about Maslow's hierarchy and employee wellness. But we'll come to that later. But I'm going to hand it over to Michael. So Henry, thank you very much for your insights. So that's your last slide, and the company to check out is Limeade. So limeade.com. Excellent, Michael. Over to you. A little bit about yourself, and then let's hear your slides.
A little about myself. Okay, look, I come from a physiotherapy background originally. I've got 30 years experience as a physiotherapist and some history before that. Probably the last 20 years I've been working broadly around health, safety and well-being, and currently I'm a business partner within that safety space, but does edge into well-being. And I see my role very much is in many ways as being the bridge between our corporate environment and people out in the operational space. And I think, Jeevan, let's go to the next slide. This is very relevant, and probably the next one again. This one's very relevant, I think, to what Henry was just saying. Certainly Australian Unity sees itself, that's my employer, by the way, they see themselves as a wellbeing business, and very much what Henry was saying, you know, this idea of linking this broad, diverse idea of well-being, and they have a portfolio across health, wealth, insurance, and care services, and the idea there that it's providing service to people across the life cycle. Australian Unity has partnered with Deakin University for the last 20 years, has been undertaking research annually that looks at this Australian Unity Wellbeing Index, and look, it really reflects that traditional, probably, you know, 8 dimensions of wellness idea. It looks at people's health, it looks at their connections to others, how safe they feel, their overall standard of living, their financial well-being, if you like. What are they achieving in life? Is it meaningful? Do they have a career path? Do they feel connected to their community and others? And do they have a rosy future, or is it a bleak future? Now, today what I want to do is talk about well-being, but I'm probably a bit of a critic around a lot of well-being programs, in some ways being through what I would call the prism of, this sort of middle-class prism of, this is what you need to do, to be well, and whether it's your physical health, your mental health, financial, this is what you have to do. And I don't disagree with that idea, but what I want to present today is that there's people working in jobs that are low paid, that have enormous pressures in their lives, they're eking out a living, and coming to work can in some ways add to that burden. They can, on one hand, get tremendous satisfaction from the work they do, but it can be very physically and mentally demanding. So I'll gradually shift into that space. But what are we doing around what Australian Unity terms real wellbeing? Well, there's quite an extended employee wellbeing and safety team that I'm part of. So that includes business partners like myself that in many ways build capability with managers around injury prevention. And we also have people who work within that injury management space. Yes, we have the conventional sort of corporate-based exercise and healthy lifestyle offerings. And certainly in the first quarter of this year, there'll be this emphasis around, the mental health and resilience and importance of sleep hygiene. And look, that's all good. But I think one of the things that's very easy to slip into is what you do see also in the training space, this idea that if you throw content at people, somehow they'll magically imbibe that and they'll change their behavior and things will just happen magically. I'm not saying there isn't a place for information, there is, but obviously public health authorities at government level and NGOs are, wrestling with the whole, idea of health promotion and prevention of chronic illness. It's not an easy space. We have the employee assistance program. We have an early intervention treatment program where, our employees, if they're experiencing an injury, can get, free physiotherapy. We've just tightened up our home office workstation setup guidance, and we're providing now a subsidy so people can equip themselves at home with, an additional screen and decent setup with desk and chair and so forth. Look, we do flu vax. Something we brought in last year, which I think is very good, is a domestic and family violence policy. So that does potentially support, predominantly women, of course, around financial support for legal advice, gives them flexible working arrangements. It provides special leave for them. Another thing I'll highlight there in that list, which I'm very passionate about, is our Reconciliation Action Plan. So the idea of providing employment opportunities for Indigenous Australians, internships, an employment pathway into the business. We have Aboriginal home care, which I'll touch on today. We have private health insurance discounts, and we have wealth management, financial planning advice, stuff like that. So, it does holistically, I think, support people's well-being. Jeevan, let's go to the next slide.
And while I'm doing that, Michael, just to mention that it's good that you've kind of recognized the domestic and family violence is probably going to increase, and there's already stats coming through, and it's a bit of a sleeper. Right. We'll probably hear more of that, coming through. Absolutely.
So I think that's just a repetition of that, Jeevan. So look, let's go to the next slide. We'll keep moving along. Look, this is the group I really wanted to focus in on. Most of the work I do is with these home care workers. They're predominantly women. They're usually older women. They're amazing people. They are, by and large, incredibly committed to the people out in the community that they work with, who tend to be very vulnerable people, aged and frail, have disabilities of physical or perhaps intellectual, or perhaps they have mental health barriers in their lives. They provide them with personal care to get them up and out and about for the day. They do domestic assistance. They prepare light meals. They're really essential to a lot of people. A lot of people live on their own. So they provide an amazing service. But some of the challenges that exist for us as a business is an aging workforce. So they tend to be older women. There are some men, but it's certainly by and large, it's older women. I should say that these women, as you might imagine, they are carers in their own lives. So, they come to work and they give everything to their clients. The clients aren't necessarily appreciative of that. Sometimes they're difficult to get on with. The relationships are difficult to manage. It's stressful. But then in their own lives, you get talking to home care workers and they'll say, well, look, my sister's got a substance abuse problem and I'm actually looking after my niece. I'm bringing my niece up, or my mum's very elderly, so I'm helping out my mum a lot, or my sister had breast cancer. And then you'll say to that care worker, you'll say, so who provides you with care? Oh, no one. I just care for myself. So I have this sort of thing that they're a really great group of people, but they don't necessarily see the need to invest in their own health and well-being. So as challenging. They're low paid, they have low autonomy in many ways, they're a disempowered group of people. The funding to the sector is limited, so that means the training, the supervision, the capability building that goes on is fairly limited. They work remotely, they're unsupervised, they're in private homes. So on one hand, they go into a home that's transiently their workplace, but to the customer, the client, it's their home, it's their kingdom. So invariably there's some things there around us in terms of managing the health and safety within the home. There's time pressures. As I said before, it's physically and mentally demanding. Our workforce is culturally diverse. So in parts of Western Sydney, for instance, we've certainly got a culturally and linguistically diverse group of care workers that, we probably need to do better with, I think, in terms of the way we communicate with them and the way we support them on the job and the way we're sensitive to their culture. And as I mentioned earlier, we have a substantial group of people working within Aboriginal home care, which brings with its own challenges. So we know that Aboriginal Australians, there's a huge gap in terms of health and education and life outcomes. So for both our customers and many of our care workers, they may have chronic conditions. They may be experiencing, multi-generational trauma. So in terms of their mental health, there's challenges there. Henry mentioned burnout. Look, I think there is burnout very much in this group. They're totally committed to what they do. They're passionate. They have a very, very intimate relationship with their customer. But there's no doubt that it takes its toll on many of them, both mentally, emotionally, and of course physically. So there's a high incidence of injuries. So it's not an easy thing to manage the health and well-being of this group. And I think one of the things that I always come back to is that, it was interesting what you said, Henry, about the environment of a business, of an organisation really seeping into how people, manage and support their own well-being. I think that's a very interesting thing. I also think, though, that, there is this self-determination. There is this, I guess you've got to contemplate your life. You've got to reflect your life. You've got to acknowledge that perhaps things could be different. You perhaps have to see a better future for yourself, and perhaps then you need to be able to step into action. And that might mean changing your lifestyle. It might mean embracing other things in your life. So I think there is an individual determination around health and well-being. Jeevan, let's move along to the next one. Look, obviously COVID's had a huge impact on our home care workforce that, is in an intimate relationship with customers. That includes people working within what's been identified as COVID hotspots, particularly in places like southwestern Sydney of recent times. In Victoria now, we've got some people in Victoria. Our business is actually Melbourne-based, but home care is predominantly New South Wales. But in Victoria, for instance, there's a real lockdown there, so people are having to get permits to actually leave their home and go out and work. And I think a lot of this, it brings a huge layer to magnifying the sort of stress that our care workers experience, both from the potential exposure of themselves to COVID, but because they care so much about their clients, the people they serve, they don't want to be a transmission pathway to those people and the broader family. So I think that, it weighs on them very heavily. I think Australian Unity did a very good job around, they pulled together a COVID-19 management team. They identified the sorts of needs, and I think similar to what Rebecca said, we have a knowledge base on SharePoint that's accessible to all our people. We have an advice line by phone or email that's, very, very well staffed. We have a very, what I call a multi-channel communication strategy. I think capability building has been, a really important thing. So in the home care space, our people certainly are familiar with the use of PPE, but we've really had to, reinforce that and enhance that and continue to send very strong messages around the importance of that. There's been some self-guided resources they have access to, whether it be video content or infographics. And then just the practicalities of procuring and supplying PPE to our people. The other thing that was a really important thing, and I do spend a fair bit of my time on, is that we have an online incident reporting digital platform that we've now added a COVID-19 notification segment to. So there's been a lot of components to keep people safe. But look, I won't talk too much longer. I just want to probably just highlight three things that I think strongly go a long way to promoting and driving well-being in the workforce, and the things that I certainly feel very strongly about. The first one is investing in manager and leadership development. So I think that the way that our managers and leaders create a supportive environment. I'm very big on enabling people with a strengths-based approach. So I think that capability of managers and leaders cannot be underestimated in our well-being when we come to work. I think that I also feel that equipping people with capability so they can shine on the job, get job satisfaction, know they're doing a good job, continuing to grow, and being able to reflect on their experience daily on the job. I certainly favour supporting people in the flow of work around their learning and development, and helping them to be the best they can be. And the third aspect that I'm a huge believer in is a connected workplace. So really connecting people to each other. I think we used the word silo earlier. I think connecting people across the silos, and I think that's important for many reasons. But I think for getting the work done. So being able to tap into and leverage the collective intelligence, the wisdom that exists across your business more broadly, and then of course the social connection it brings as well. So on that note, and look, I think there is, Henry, I think there is room for a digital wellbeing platform across our home care workers. They have iPhones, and that's been some of the challenges that they've had to adapt to over the last year or so. And perhaps we need to exploit that further. But look, I'll finish on that note, and we'll get into some further discussion.
Thank you, Michael. I think, unfortunately, we've kind of run out of time, but hey, thanks for the presentation. I think you can really feel, how well you know your audience and their, and the difficulties they face. So that's kind of brilliant from an employee experience point of view. So we are short of time. We've actually gone over time. I do want to thank the panelists, and I do want to kind of end by, asking the panelists just to say their one top tip, insight, advice, before we finish. So probably, start with Rebecca yourself. Just one tip, advice, tip, anything.
Oh gosh, I mean, where my head's at today is be present and be grateful, because ultimately there's a lot of things we can't control, but we can control our mindset, and if we can start there, that's a big help.
Thank you, Rebecca. Henry, over to you. You're on mute. Yeah.
Gosh, I was hoping to go last. It's always hard to boil it down to one thing, but I would say now's the right time to show everyone care. And just whether it's technology or not is irrelevant, and the science stands behind it, and care is needed right now.
Thank you. And Michael?
Yeah, look, I very much sit in the empathy space, and I guess I try to live my life by putting myself in other people's shoes. And I think at this point in time, we need to cut people some slack, and it's not easy whether you're out at the coalface or whether you're at home in your little office isolated or managing all the competing demands that brings. I think we need to just be kind.
Thanks, everyone. And look, keep safe. And thanks again to the panel, especially Henry. Must be very late there. So, hey, follow EX Assembly. And this discussion could go on for a couple of hours. So thanks to the participants for the lively discussion on chat. And the recording will be available, but we'll hope to see you at the next EX Assembly. So thanks, panelists, and keep safe.